Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Going Deeper. My name is Alton, and I'm glad that you could join us. Today with me is Fred Hacker. Fred is an elder at Knox Presbyterian Church. He is a sustaining elder, which means that he is not an active elder, and yet he's still oddly quite active in the church. And so I'm really glad that Fred could join me today. How's it going, Fred?
It's going well, and I'm really glad you didn't say he's an old elder.
Well, it's implied in the term, isn't it? And the reason I have Fred on today is because, I always ask for questions. If you have any questions about the Sunday teaching or, even life in general, I encourage people to submit them to me. Now, Fred submitted a question, but it was in the form of a 4-paragraph essay, and there wasn't a question attached. So I said, can you phrase that in the form of a question? And Fred said, sure. And the question that he gave me was, I have it right here, where does discipleship lead us? And I thought, I have to have him on because he's quoting Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the Sermon on the Mount. And I thought, let's just chat. So here we are, Fred. What was your reaction to Sunday's sermon?
I thought it was excellent. And I thought that your little vignette with the coffee cup really brought the sermon into focus in terms of practical terms. The whole concept of discipleship, which you were touching on, is one that fascinates me, which is why I wrote my book to you.
Yeah. I mean, discipleship is a huge topic. Now, you mentioned Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Who is Dietrich Bonhoeffer?
Bonhoeffer was a theologian in Germany pre-World War II. Ordained at a very young age in the Lutheran Church. During the 30s, as the Lutherans were sort of playing up to Adolf Hitler, he became increasingly concerned that the church wasn't fulfilling its role in that society. And he felt that the church had been conscripted, it became the state church and was actually part of the Third Reich. So he was an active militant opponent of Hitler's and ended up paying the price a few days before the end of World War II when he was hung.
Yeah, it's a tragedy, but also an inspiring story about commitment. And we're talking about discipleship. Commitment is a big component in that. So how do you think, Fred, that commitment plays a role in discipleship?
Well, I guess the issue is for me, and the reason why I wrote to you was that discipleship isn't just okay, let's follow Jesus, but I don't want that to interrupt my life in any way.
Yeah.
So what Bonhoeffer sort of added to the conversation for me was that there's a cost to discipleship.
Yeah.
And when Jesus called the disciples, he didn't say, hey guys, tune in once a week for an hour and I'll tell you. He said to them, follow me, drop everything. So when he called the first disciples who, he just said, leave it behind, leave everything behind and come and follow me. I've got a couple of verses here and I know you know this, but the one that I thought was fascinating was James and John, two of the early disciples. He called them. They left their father Zebedee in the boat. They were fishermen, and they left the hired servants behind, and they just went and followed him. And others immediately left their nets. That was Peter and his brother Andrew. They were the first disciples to be called. They just walked away from their nets. Like, who does that?
Do you think Zebedee was kind of ticked off?
I wouldn't blame him.
Neither would I. Where are you going?
Yeah.
We've got nets to clean.
Yeah. One of the disciples, Matthew or Levi, was a tax collector. And so he's sitting in his tax booth and he just gets up and leaves. And, you got a picture, there's probably some money in the till. And he just walks away, left everything, got up and followed.
Yeah, and I think for him that was there was a big cost because he had a pretty great business where he'd skim money off the top as he collected taxes.
Yeah.
So he's giving up not just maybe his time, but also a lucrative career.
That's right. And later, Jesus says to some folks, "Follow me," and the person says, "Well, let me first go and bury my father." I mean, this is pretty dramatic. And Jesus says, "Allow the dead to bury their own dead, but as for you, go and proclaim everywhere the kingdom of God." I mean, that's pretty stark.
So how well do you think it would go over if I'm preaching and I said, all right, leave your nets behind, we're going? Do you think that would go over well today?
No, but I think I don't think that there's any such a thing as perfect discipleship.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an aspiration. It's not an achievement.
Mm.
But I do think we have to aspire to that.
Mm.
We've had courses taught, the Alpha course, for example, at Knox, and I remember leading that and being struck by, this is back when Nicky Gumbel was leading it, struck by him telling the story of a friend who said to the friend who'd been pursuing him, saying, you've got to change your lifestyle and come to Jesus. And this was a guy whose life was full of wine, women, and song. And Nicky said, the time has come. And the guy said, can I just have 2 more weeks? Which always struck me as sort of funny, because at some point we're called to leave our old life behind and follow.
Now, maybe for the people who are watching, what would it look like? I'm sure it can look a million different ways, but what might it look like to follow Jesus today?
Well, I think you've done a good job in the last few weeks of introducing some of the elements of following Jesus, and I don't think it needs to be that complicated. I think sometimes we get very formulaic about these things, and essentially it's just doing what Jesus did. It's trying to pattern oneself after Jesus. So what did he did? He cared.
Yeah.
He loved.
Yeah.
He put others above himself.
Yeah.
He made sacrifices. He made the ultimate sacrifice. Well, he does call us to take up our cross, and his disciples, many of them did end up on a cross, some of them upside down.
Yeah.
But I think for us, even if we just recognize that there are sacrifices.
I'm thinking about that parable where Jesus says, if I trust you with a little, then I can trust you with a lot.
Yeah.
And if I can't trust you, that one guy buries his master's treasure in the ground. The others invested in increments, some more, some less. I think that's a metaphor for taking this gospel message that we've inherited. What do we do with it? Do we bury it in the ground, or do we invest it? And for me, the challenge is day by day trying to invest it, even if it's just in a small way, a small loving act, a small amount of kindness, maybe not posting that snarky comment on Facebook, complaining a little bit less, whatever that might be. I think if you're faithful in the small things, there's an addition that happens when you add it all up. It becomes something quite big.
There's been a lot of jokes over the years about the what would Jesus do sort of concept, but it's pretty simple, and it's pretty simple to say, and it's impossible to achieve. And I think we all have to recognize that, but it doesn't mean we don't try. One of the things about Bonhoeffer that fascinated me was that he viewed the Sermon on the Mount as being the ultimate statement of what discipleship was all about. When we follow Jesus, we should be following the Sermon on the Mount. And when I was in seminary, I wrote a paper about this, and really the thrust of the paper was that we don't even talk about that. We don't preach about the Sermon on the Mount very much. We don't talk about it, and the reason is it's too hard. So all sorts of scholars have said, well, it's not really intended to be followed, or it's an ideal, but I don't think Jesus said, this is pie in the sky, folks. Leave this, or this is just my dreams.
This is me waxing poetic. Write it down, read it from time to time, but then basically ignore it.
Yeah, I don't think we can.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot like when my doctor hands me that pamphlet on how to lose weight, and I say, this is great stuff, doc. And then I put it on the seat of my truck. Somehow it gets lost under the seat, and I find it 5 years later when I finally clean my truck out. I've ignored it completely. we do that with the Sermon on the Mount sometimes, don't we?
Well, it's interesting that we're having this conversation at this time because we're approaching Lent,
Mm-hmm.
and part of the Lent process historically has been a time of self-examination,
Mm-hmm.
a time of asking ourselves, what didn't I do that I should have done? What can I do now to make up for what I should have done? And what am I going to do in the future?
Yeah.
And I don't know that we focus on those things as much as we have as much as the early church did, put it that way.
Yeah, self-introspection isn't maybe something we do a lot of these days. And yet it's funny, we read a lot of self-help books and we're talking about this stuff, but it's usually about how to be positive, how to, be empowered and that kind of stuff. Sometimes the place you need to start is truly understanding who you are as a person, your own faults, your own sins, and then letting grace pour into your life and working from there.
I think the distinction is, at least as I see it, that a lot of these self-help books are saying how to be a better you.
Yeah.
Means maximizing yourself for your benefit.
Yes.
That's not what the
Yes.
Sermon on the Mount was all about. The Sermon on the Mount was how to be a better friend, how to be a better relative, how to be a better citizen.
Yeah.
Jesus didn't talk about how you build yourself up and flatter your ego. He talked about what do you do for other people.
So for some people, this might be a bit of a revelation. And I think back to Bonhoeffer, because here's this guy, he's in the church, he's a religious leader, and he probably starts out really believing in his institutions, and then finds out that it's pretty easy for a government to co-opt a religious movement and even the clergy. And it's through that process where he really has to search the scriptures and come to an understanding of what it means to be a disciple. And of course, for him, that meant insurrection, really a plot against Hitler, and he paid the ultimate price for it. So how are we today, if we're just now maybe having that Bonhoeffer moment, discovering there's more to discipleship than just going to church for an hour or whatever our practice might be? What kind of practical changes do you think we could make in our lives to live out that more costly discipleship?
I guess each of us have to do that in our own way. Ultimately, what we're seeking is a relationship. It's a relationship with Jesus, and through that relationship, to grow in our relationship with others. Mm-hmm. Bonhoeffer says in that book, The Cost of Discipleship, that only a person who believes is obedient, and only the obedient believe. And so there is that element of cost in the relationship. One of the other things that Bonhoeffer said in that same book, Alton, that may reflect on sort of the church today, and if I may, I'll just quote this. He says, "So many people come to church with a genuine desire to hear what we have to say, yet they're always going back home with the uncomfortable feeling that we're making it too difficult for them to come to Jesus." I don't know that we make it too difficult. I think in some ways we don't explain the problem enough. It's of interest to me that many of the most successful churches in North America today are some of the most fundamental ones. Mm-hmm. Some of the ones who make the greatest demands on their followers.
Yeah. I think there's something about being called to a cause, to rally around something that is costly, and that puts a value on it. I have a YouTube channel where I review watches, and so companies will give me a watch to review, and then I pass it on, and I have to look at this watch and go, it didn't cost me anything. I don't value it a whole lot. Now, if I put my hard-earned money into a nice watch and I buy it for myself, I really value it and I respect it. And I think for some reason we've made discipleship so free and easy that we don't value really what we're getting, which is the Savior of the universe calling us personally into a relationship with him, but not just the feelings and all of that and the existential stuff that goes with that, but actually following him day by day in that relationship, going where he would have us go, saying what he would have us say. I think you made the point in your email really well in reflecting upon my coffee with a friend 5 years later, that I sort of cast this vision for Knox that probably would require quite a bit of cost for some of our parishioners. Now, when I shared that little 8-minute vignette, how did you feel about that? What kind of emotions did that stir within you?
Well, I think that led me to write back to you, because what I saw was that if we're to achieve that dream, everybody's going to have to give up a little. There are people who may have attachments to places or things or memories or experiences
Yeah.
that may have to move on from those. But Jesus didn't call us to live in our memories. He called us to go forth and make disciples, and so that's part of what we have to do. Bonhoeffer had a term for what Pierre Burton called the comfortable pew back in the 60s, and Bonhoeffer called it cheap grace, where we think all we have to do is say, okay, Jesus, come on aboard. Now, where was I in my life?
Yeah. Come into my life, save me from my sins, get me that golden ticket to heaven, and I'll see you every Sunday for an hour. That's the deal.
Well, maybe not every Sunday.
Well, it depends how nice the weather is and if we need to go boating or not.
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem, isn't it? That we think that somehow accepting Jesus is a once in a lifetime experience.
Yeah.
And I think people get that understanding because some people teach that, but it's not. It's an ongoing commitment, recommitment, rededication.
Absolutely. Every day, sometimes hour by hour.
Yep.
I really think that if Knox is going to have a vital and flourishing ministry in the next 10, 20, 30, and 100 years, that we need to make some really tough choices. And for some of us, that's going to mean letting go of some of our comfort zones, some things that mean a great deal to us. But we have to ask ourselves, what means more to us, following Christ's call to make disciples or maintaining the comfort zones that we've literally built? And I get that. I'm sitting in a beautiful office surrounded by windows. I have 4 cabinets filled with toys around me, a big table. I mean, I love this. This is my sanctuary, my safe space. This is one of the things I'll have to give up. We've had to give up staffing. I used to love seeing Jolene 4 days a week. And unfortunately, that's one thing we've had to give up. And we all have to make sacrifices. I'm prepared to make them. And I really hope that others will be as well.
It comes back to the question we were talking about before. Is our faith all about us, or is it all about others?
Yeah.
And Jesus made that pretty clear. I mean, his last words on earth were to tell us to go forth and make disciples, to be outward focused rather than inward focused. So do I want to commit to sitting in the pew that my parents and my grandparents sat in, or am I prepared to go forth and children?
Yeah. Amen to that. That's the great question. And it doesn't end with just when we leave this building. The whole church needs to be committed at their core, passionate about reaching the people in Midland who need to hear the good news of Jesus Christ, getting involved in the community events and outreach, and inviting people, whether it's to a small group or a worship service in their sphere of influence, their friends, their family, the coworkers. I mean, it's one thing to say we're going to leave this building and move somewhere, but that at the end of the day only solves some financial problems. At our heart, we need a passionate rally cry to really make a difference in the lives of the people of Midland.
Bonhoeffer put that really well. He said, the cross is laid on every Christian. The first Christ suffering, which every man must experience, is the call to abandon his attachments to this world.
Take up your cross and follow me.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of the rich young ruler who comes to Jesus, and Jesus asks him, has he lived up to some of the commandments? He doesn't ask him about all of them. And the rich young ruler says, yes, yeah, I'm committed. And Jesus said, then leave everything, give up everything, follow me.
Yeah.
And the rich young ruler says, oh, I can't do that.
I like the way they put it. They say he went away sad because he had much wealth.
Yeah.
Like it was just a foregone conclusion that was just not going to happen.
A lot of those stories are told to us not that they are they're examples.
Mm-hmm.
They're examples.
And here's the thing, and I want people who are watching this to listen to this very carefully. That rich young ruler, if he had sold all his possessions and followed Jesus, would have probably found, not even probably, guaranteed, would have found more enrichment and fulfillment in his life than with all the money in the world. He would not have regretted it for a second. I have never met someone who gave up for Jesus and said, I regret following Jesus. I have never, ever once experienced that. So if you're watching this today and you're thinking, I can't give up everything for Christ. Well, number one, he may not ask you to sell all your possessions like he did with the rich young ruler. And number two, even if he did, I guarantee you would never regret it. Well, Fred, thank you so much for joining me today. This was great.
Thanks for inviting me.
Any final wisdom before we go?
Well, your last comment got me thinking that some of my Christian friends have made the comment, and I sense this that they've never missed a dollar that they spent on mission, church, charity. Somehow those dollars are better used in that direction, and somehow we don't suffer without them.
It's amazing. Absolutely. I totally agree. Well, thanks everybody for watching. Thanks again for my special guest, Fred. And if you have any questions or you want to send me an essay, go ahead and email me at revalton@knoxmidland.ca, and I will try to address it, or I'll force you to come on in the next version of Going Deeper.